Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we journey into the world of Westeros and beyond, where power is not always measured by the size of an army or the weight of a crown. Sometimes it lives in a whisper, a secret, or a flame that cannot be extinguished. Tonight, we count down the 10 most powerful characters in Game of Thrones, from the formidable to the truly unstoppable. So settle in, let your body grow heavy, and allow the stories of kings, warriors, and forces beyond human understanding carry you gently into the night. Number 10. Stannis Baratheon, the rightful king who would not bend. There are men who claim power, and then there are men who believe, with every fibre of their being, that power is their birthright. Stannis Baratheon was the latter. Cold, uncompromising, and utterly relentless, Stannis was a military mind unlike almost any other in Westeros. He had won battles that other men would have surrendered before they began, and he carried the weight of his convictions like armour no sword could pierce. What made Stannis truly formidable was not just his tactical brilliance, but his absolute refusal to yield to political convenience. He saw the world in stark terms of right and wrong, law and disorder, and he pursued his claim to the Iron Throne with a ferocity that unnerved even his enemies. Combined with the dark powers channeled through the priestess Melisandre, Stannis became something more than a soldier king. He became a man touched by forces that existed far beyond the ordinary rules of war. His flame burned fierce and bright, even if it was ultimately extinguished far too soon. And in that fierce, unyielding brightness we move one step higher. Number 9. Tywin Lannister, the man the kingdom truly feared. If Stannis represented the power of conviction, Tywin Lannister represented something altogether colder and more enduring. He was the architect of Lannister dominance, the man who transformed a wealthy house into the most feared political force in the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin did not need to raise a sword to make men tremble. His presence alone was enough. For decades, Tywin had served as the true power behind multiple thrones, steering the fate of Westeros through careful alliances, ruthless punishment, and an unshakable understanding of how power actually worked. He was the man who orchestrated the Red Wedding. He was the man whose armies sacked King's Landing when it suited him. He was the mind that kept the Lannister legacy alive through wars, rebellions, and the considerable embarrassments of his own children. What separated Tywin from so many others on this list was his ability to think in generations rather than moments. He did not simply want to win the battle in front of him. He wanted to build something that would outlast him by centuries. That ambition, cold and vast as a winter sky, places him firmly among the most powerful figures the show ever gave us. And yet, even the greatest architects can be undone from within. We climb higher still. Number 8. Melisandre, the Red Priestess of Asshai. She arrived on the shores of Dragonstone carrying fire and shadow in equal measure, and from the moment she appeared, the rules of what was possible in Westeros began to quietly change. Melisandre of Asshai was not powerful in the way that soldiers and kings are powerful. Her strength lived in a different dimension entirely, one where death was not always the end, and where ancient forces could be called upon to reshape the living world. She gave birth to a shadow that killed a king. She saw visions in the flames that guided the course of wars. She resurrected a man from death, and in doing so changed the entire trajectory of the conflict against the Night King. These were not small things. These were acts that bent the fundamental laws of the world the show inhabited. What made Melisandre truly unsettling was how little she seemed bound by ordinary human concerns. She had lived for centuries, sustained by her faith and by powers that even she did not fully understand. She made mistakes, grave ones, but her capacity for influence over the great events of her time was undeniable. The fire she carried was older and stranger than anything Westeros had seen in a very long time. From the flame, we rise to those who were born into something even greater. Number 7. Jaime Lannister, the finest sword in the kingdom. Before his captivity, before the loss that changed everything, Jaime Lannister was widely considered the most dangerous swordsman alive in Westeros. Not just skilled, not just trained, genuinely, terrifyingly gifted in a way that placed him in a category almost entirely his own. Men who had faced him in combat spoke of it the way survivors speak of storms, with a kind of quiet, reluctant awe. Jaime carried the burden of his reputation like a second skin. The Kingslayer, they called him, and the name was meant as an insult. But it only reinforced how capable he truly was. He had driven a sword through the Mad King's back not out of cowardice, but out of a calculation that saved 500,000 lives in King's Landing. That was not the act of a man without power. That was the act of a man who understood in one crystalline moment that he alone had the ability to change everything. Even after his injury, even diminished from his former glory, Jaime remained a formidable presence shaped by decades of near-unmatched skill. His power was physical, yes, but it was also the power of a man who had already proven what he was capable of. And in Westeros, reputation is its own kind of armour. We leave the realm of mortal swords now and step towards something far older. Number 6. Bran Stark, the Three-Eyed Raven. There is a particular kind of power that does not announce itself with armies or fire. It simply watches and waits and knows. Bran Stark, by the time he fully became the Three-Eyed Raven, had transcended almost everything that made him human in the conventional sense. He could see across time, he could inhabit living creatures. He existed in a relationship with the past and present that no other human character in the show could claim. The full scope of what Bran could do was never completely laid out, which in many ways made him more unsettling, not less. He knew things he should not have known. He saw events unfolding before they happened. He carried within him the accumulated memory of every three-eyed raven who had come before, stretching back into the deep history of the world before the Andals and the First Men. Whether or not the show fully honoured the weight of what he had become, the lore itself is clear. A being with access to all of history, capable of warging into living things and existing outside the normal flow of time, is a power unlike almost anything else in Westeros. Quiet, vast, and strange as the roots of the weirwood trees themselves. From the ancient, we move now to the purely terrifying. Number 5. The Night King, ruler of the army of the dead. He never spoke a word. He did not need to. The Night King communicated in the language of inevitability, and that language needed no translation. He was the great existential threat of the entire series, a being created by the children of the forest as a weapon, and who had, over thousands of years, become something far beyond what his creators intended. His power was singular and absolute within its domain. Every person who died beyond the wall, and eventually everywhere his army reached, rose again to serve him. He could raise the dead with a single gesture. He destroyed one of Daenerys' dragons with a single throw of an ice spear, and then raised that same dragon as a weapon against the living. He walked through fire. He shrugged off dragon glass. He was by almost every conventional measure unkillable. What the Night King represented went beyond military strength. He was entropy made flesh, the slow cold end of all things. The fact that he required a very specific and extraordinary act to defeat him only underscores how far outside the normal rules of power he truly existed. From the cold of death, we move now toward fire and blood. Number 4. Khal Drogo, the great Khal who never lost. East of the narrow sea, in the vast rolling grasslands of the Dothraki Sea, there existed a kind of power entirely foreign to the lords and kings of Westeros. It was raw, elemental, and built on the simple and terrifying truth that Khal Drogo had never been defeated, not once. In a culture where leadership was determined entirely by strength and conquest, that record was everything. Drogo commanded a khalasar of over 100,000 warriors, riders who had been born on horseback, and who knew nothing of fear in the way that settled peoples understood it. He himself was a physical specimen of almost mythological proportions, a fighter of extraordinary natural ability who had accumulated the braids of 100 victories. In Dothraki culture, each braid represented a conquest. His reached nearly to his waist. Beyond his military might, Drogo carried the weight of a living legend. His name alone was enough to change the calculations of anyone thinking about war in Essos. His love for Daenerys, unexpected and genuine, only added a human dimension to a figure who might otherwise have remained purely symbolic. His loss was felt not just as a personal tragedy, but as the disappearance of an entire force of nature from the world. From the east, we return now to the fire that changed everything. Number 3. Cersei Lannister, the queen who burned her enemies to ash. Cersei Lannister was not powerful in spite of the limitations placed upon her. She was powerful because of what she did with them. In a world that denied women the right to rule openly, Cersei carved out dominion through intelligence, patience, manipulation, and when all else failed, a willingness to do what no one else would dare. The destruction of the great Sept of Baelor, carried out with wildfire and cold precision, was perhaps the single most audacious act of political violence the show ever depicted. And she did it without blinking. What Cersei understood, more clearly than almost anyone around her, was that power in Westeros was ultimately theatrical. It was about perception, about making others believe that crossing you would cost them more than they could afford to pay. She was a master of that theatre, playing every scene with an intelligence sharpened by years of navigating a court that underestimated her at every turn. She was also, crucially, a survivor. She outlasted rivals, husbands, enemies, and children. She clawed her way to the top of a system designed to keep her beneath it, and she sat on the Iron Throne as Queen Regnant in her own right. Whatever her flaws, and they were many, her capacity for power was never in question. We are near the summit now. 2 remain. Number 2, Jon Snow, the shield that guards the realms of men. Jon Snow's power was not simply the power of a skilled fighter, though he was certainly that. It was the power of something rarer and more quietly extraordinary. He was the convergence point of the 2 greatest dynasties in Westerosi history, the last son of a Targaryen prince and a Stark daughter, carrying in his blood the combined legacy of ice and fire. He was, by birthright, the true heir to the Iron Throne, whether or not he ever wanted it. Beyond his lineage, Jon possessed something that no throne or army could manufacture. He inspired genuine loyalty in people who had no reason to follow him. Wildlings who had fought the Night's Watch for generations chose to stand beside him. The dead were raised against him and he stood his ground. He was killed and he came back, not through dark magic alone, but because the world, it seemed, was not finished with him yet. Jon was also one of the rare characters in Game of Thrones who consistently chose sacrifice over self-interest. He gave up the love of his life, he gave up his claim to power, he walked back beyond the wall into exile because it was the right thing to do. That quality, that stubborn, quiet, moral courage, is its own kind of strength, and it placed him, always, just 1 step below the woman who changed the entire world. Number 1, Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons. From the timid girl sold into marriage by her brother, to the conqueror of cities, the breaker of chains, and the rider of dragons, Daenerys Targaryen travelled a distance that no other character in the series could match. Her arc was the longest, the most transformative, and ultimately the most devastating, because the full weight of her power, when it was finally unleashed without restraint, was enough to reduce an entire city to ash in a single morning. She commanded 3 dragons, the only living dragons in the known world. She built armies from nothing, earning the loyalty of the Unsullied, the Dothraki, and countless freed slaves through a combination of genuine compassion and overwhelming strength. She survived fire, she survived poison, she survived betrayal after betrayal, rising each time with something harder and more resolute in her eyes. What made Daenerys the most powerful character in Game of Thrones was not any single ability or army or dragon. It was the combination of everything she carried, her lineage, her dragons, her armies, her unbreakable will, and the terrifying possibility that she contained within her the capacity for both salvation and destruction in equal measure. The world had not seen anything like her in living memory, and when her story ended, the silence she left behind was as vast and heavy as everything she'd burned, and so our countdown comes to its gentle close. 10 extraordinary figures, each carrying their own kind of power, each shaping the world of Westeros in ways that will echo through its history for ages to come. Let their stories settle around you now like a warm and quiet blanket. There is nothing left to solve tonight, nothing left to carry, only rest and the soft, fading world of Westeros drifting slowly away. Sleep well, dear listener, the night is yours.